Hello and welcome to the Eastern Front. This is Julia Joja with the Middle East Institute, Georgetown and George Washington Universities, and I'm joined by my colleagues.
Giselle Donnelly. I work at the American Enterprise Institute as a senior fellow, and
Dalibor Rohach, also with AI.
On our podcast, we talk about the many challenges to European peace that tend to emerge along a line running from the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Eastern Front, and about why those matter to the United States. If you enjoy this episode, as always, consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. Today, we're honored to have with us Todor Tagarev, who was Minister of Defense of Bulgaria back in 2013, but also more recently from 2023 to 2024. He's an academic, politically independent, and renowned military expert in the region. Todor, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Likewise, thank you for the invitation.
So we'll talk about the upcoming summit. Of course, that's one of the big topics, and we're all hopeful on this podcast that the Eastern Front or Eastern Flank will be prominently featured in the summit, though our hopes are, let's say, limited by reality. and we want to ask you about that, but perhaps we can start with Bulgaria, who to many, I think, that are looking from the other side of the Atlantic is a bit of a mystery and has been going through some important, at least visible changes in the context of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in relationship to its neighbors within the alliance, and particularly, of course, with Russia, with whom we've all had to radically shift our relationship. If we're looking from this side of the Atlantic, we often come across the issue that people consider politics and policies in Central and Eastern Europe fluid, flexible, and maybe difficult to apprehend. And while in the north of the flank, we have a little bit more perceived stability, Nordic countries, Baltic countries, Poland to some extent, when we're looking further south into Central Europe and Southeastern Europe, Slovakia, Hungary come to mind, Czech Republic could become an issue too, it becomes less stable. So what about Bulgaria? If you're looking back over the last couple of years and maybe into the future, how would you sum up Bulgarian politics in this very difficult political context that we're all in?
I have to confirm that we have quite a degree of political uncertainty here. Actually, after the elections on June 9, which coincided with the European Parliament elections, the biggest party in Parliament just today introduced the proposal to propose the cabinet to the National Assembly, to the Parliament, and it didn't go through, which is very unfortunate because in the last 3 years we have had parliamentary elections 6 times already. Practically on average every 6 months we hold elections. And now that this cabinet did not succeed, did not go through Parliament, the chance is that this Parliament will be able to create a cabinet indeed, which basically means that in the fall we may have another parliamentary elections. That turns away a lot of the people from the polls. In the last elections, only about a third of the people voted, and this is very unfortunate. We have witnessed reduction in the people going to vote from, let's say, 2/3 in the beginning of the 90s to 1/3 of the people this year. And in this lack of predictability, or for many people, it just does not make enough sense to go to the polls again. So that creates an environment in which we do not have a stable government. Actually, the one I served in, it served for 10 months from June 23 to April this year. That was probably the longest serving government in the last few years. And when you have this type of government, obviously it is difficult to make some long-term predictions, to establish strategic goals, to pursue consistently certain strategic goals. On the other hand, a good majority of the people and the representatives in Parliament support Bulgaria's role in NATO, rely on NATO for our own security, support the increased defense budget, and the enhancing the capabilities of the armed forces, which creates some preconditions for developing defense capabilities. Of course, when you have new ministers coming in like every few months, you cannot rely on a very cohesive and consistent effort in that regard, but the prerequisites are there. The economy is doing well, actually. We had this news that Bulgaria just passed the threshold and is now considered among the rich countries in the world. We were like middle income, now it it is, in some calculations, over $14,000 per capita, which puts us in this category of the rich countries. And yeah, I remember those years, in Italy, when they're changing governments, just like we do nowadays, like every few months, and the Italian economy grew enormously.
Go figure.
So there's a sort of libertarian laissez-faire lesson to be drawn from that. Could I ask you one question about the role that the war in Ukraine plays in Bulgarian politics and sort of collective imagination? In some countries, there seems to be a ever-sharpening dividing line between people who present themselves as candidates or proponents of peace, trying to label the others who want to stick with supporting Ukraine as, the global war party, to use the the language deployed by the Georgian government of the present day. To what extent is Ukraine a dividing line in Bulgarian politics? Or is there a sort of cross-party consensus on the need to ensure that Ukraine prevails in this conflict?
It is indeed a very strong dividing line in the society and among the political parties. Actually, it is so strong that this old, let's say, debate between left and right and Democrats and former communists, etc., is now more or less lost with this division on the background. The Russian propaganda is very strong. It's to an extent direct propaganda, but mostly from local fifth column actors. And the division is indeed strong, and Bulgaria is among the countries in which the support to Ukraine is among the lowest in the European Union. Actually, I got some data from a study conducted by the European Council of Foreign Relations this morning. And on the question, for example, do you support the increase of military assistance to Ukraine from allies? Most, for example, the division you made in the beginning, that in the northern countries, most consider that a very good idea, but Bulgaria is among those that less than half of the people support that. Bulgaria, only 24% of the people think that increasing military support and the deliveries of ammunition and weapons to Ukraine is a good idea, while 63% say that this is not a good idea. Bulgaria is on the end of the spectrum among the European countries in that regard. For example, in Estonia, it's the opposite. 74% consider the delivery is a good idea.
If I may follow up quickly on that question, an official from Bulgaria under Chatham rules a few months ago said this thing that left a deep impression on me, and I'm wondering how you make sense of it, or whether you would say it's not true or amend it. He said the government since the full-scale invasion have made in Bulgaria significant progress in increasing support for Ukraine overall in the context of the full-scale invasion by several percent. And I said, how did you do that? That seems miraculous, and so many countries in the region have been trying to do that because of exactly what you're describing. And he said, we started talking about history between Bulgaria and Russia/Soviet Union that of course was discussed before in school, but in a very non-critical manner of Russia. And now he was claiming we started talking about it in more accurate terms and bringing to the public more of the incidents in which the Russian government has persecuted or even assassinated, attacked Bulgarian political figures over time. Does that sound accurate to you? How would you contextualize it?
Well, first on the support to Ukraine, what I cited are figures I got this morning from a very recent study. But since February 2022, Bulgaria has very consistently provided support to Ukraine, government after government. Actually, when the war started, we had one cabinet. Vice Prime Minister was from the Socialist Party, and she was also a Minister of the Economy, and she was loud and clear that I will not allow a single bullet to go to Ukraine. And then a few months later, it came out that Bulgaria has delivered an enormous amount of ammunitions to Ukraine in those same months from the defense industry.
I remember that story from Politico, yeah.
Yes, exactly. It came out in Politico. They quoted Ukraine's Foreign Minister Kuleba in that regard. So this is not our own assessment. This is what the Ukrainians are saying. And also then we had caretaker governments that were a bit more hesitant, but still continued the support. And then our cabinet indeed increased the support to Ukraine with deliveries not only by new production from the defense industry, but also the significant deliveries from army stocks. But the Russian propaganda is very aggressive here, and I have another set of data which is really disturbing. Yes, Russia and Putin have been very popular here earlier in the past. But after Putin attacked, and there was a survey in April 2022, which showed that 10% more people sympathized with Ukraine than with Russia. But over the time, that percentage declined, and earlier this year it was actually the opposite. 10% more of the people sympathized with Russia than with Ukraine. This is a direct result of the propaganda. And one explanation of what you said, this is that they hired some local criminals to kill a former prime minister. Even more recently, there were some explosions in the munition storage houses. There was an attempt on the life of arms trader. He survived that attack, and this is known, but somehow pro-Kremlin propaganda succeed into reducing the impact of that knowledge. The knowledge is there, but most people do not know that, or it is just, or their information space is flooded with either irrelevant or some, if not pro-Russian, then anti-European agenda. So pretty successful for Kremlin, unfortunately.
I wonder if I could shift course a little bit to take advantage of your past service as minister and to talk a little bit about military affairs in the state of Bulgarian military. It does seem, I mean, I remember going back like 25 years ago that there was a good deal of enthusiasm among American security experts and military officers in the potential for a closer relationship with both Romania and Bulgaria. In fact, I myself did some surveys of the situation and possible, basing options and options for cooperative exercises and stuff. But the progress since then has been halting or stop and start. The hopes have not fully been achieved. I'd be interested in your take on whether that's accurate, and if so, why, and whether there's now some opportunity for deeper cooperation. The new NATO response plans obviously have been updated in a way to better protect the Eastern Front, as we call it. So if you could just sort of give us a progress report based on your service.
You're right. After some hesitant early years in the early 90s to mid 90s, then Bulgaria in 1997 decided to pursue NATO membership, followed by EU membership, and all that is a fact now. For 20 years we're in NATO, 17 years we're in the European Union, which explains the growth of the economy, affluence, people in the society, comparatively, of course. Especially at the end of the 90s with the NATO campaign against Serbia, Bulgaria played a crucial role because it opened the airspace to NATO overflights while it banned overflights by Russia. There was this case when Russian paratroopers, being part of the peace forces in the former Yugoslavia, took the airport in Pristina, but they had no food, no water even, and Russia required overflight rights for transport aircraft to supply those troops, and Bulgaria said no, and among Romania as well. But maybe they considered Bulgaria as the weak link that they can go through, but Bulgaria did not allow that. The remaining support, it really opened our way to NATO. I remember soon after the war ended, President Bill Clinton visited Sofia. Maybe that's the only occasion a US president has visited. It was clear already that we'll be joining NATO. Then in the years, we have had strategic roadmaps, including the latest one was signed in September of last year for another 10 years. We have the so-called joint military facilities here with US troops are being based. Not many, not like in Romania now, the news on that huge base that will be built on Romanian territory, but still it's not a small one. We cooperate with the US in many ways, in many areas, including the operation in Iraq, then in Afghanistan 4 years. We had soldiers lost their lives in Iraq. That's valued. That is highly valued. Now Bulgaria as a country on the eastern flank of NATO is once again very important. And this will be, I think, a major discussion, if not a discussion, an issue for decisions during the NATO summit in Washington, will be the execution of the NATO regional plans. Bulgaria plays an important role here, along with the other eastern flank countries. But we're hosting one of the multinational battle groups that need to be able to be enhanced to the brigade-size battle groups. A lot of the infrastructure for transferring troops and weapons and ammunition and oil go through our territory, and our cabinet did a lot to synchronize the NATO needs, host nation support needs, infrastructure development needs with national plans and the use of funds. And here we are talking already billions of euro, which only a small portion of that comes from military budgets and from, let's say, the NATO NC program potentially, or European Military Mobility Program. But that was clearly at the attention session of our cabinet, and we made very significant progress in coordinated the infrastructure development plans, including one or two new bridges on the Danube, the transport links both by rail and road from harbors, ports in Greece through Bulgaria to go north to Romania if there is a need for that. A lot, and the cooperation in that regard is very good. We are also an important player on the Black Sea, along with Turkey and Romania as NATO allies. I think yesterday or today, this mine countermeasures task force needs to be launched, something which we initiated at the end of August last year, negotiated, signed a memorandum in January. It will be a fact. Non-littoral allies, including the US, are really interested in the opportunities, and there will be an opportunities for other allies to join that task force, if not with ships, then with other assets. The Black Sea and the naval component is also a part of the regional plans. We have contracts now and expect the first F-16s next spring to Bulgaria. We have two bases that are NATO interoperable and that they're being used for exercises by US and other allies here again, with our Air Force. During my time, we prepared and signed this contract for Stryker vehicles, armored vehicles for one mechanized brigade, which again will provide very good opportunities to exercise and if needed fight together with US troops and other allies. So a lot of progress actually in the last couple of years, thanks to Mr. Putin to a large extent.
Before, I know Yulia wants to hop in here, but I just want to ask one final question about the Ukraine war in the Black Sea. I think it's been surprising to many people that the Ukrainians have been able to essentially drive the Russian fleet away from Sebastopol and Crimea. What lessons have occurred to you and your colleagues over the last couple of years in regard to operations and control of the Black Sea?
Well, sure, that was one of most surprising examples that one side without having a fleet can defeat the fleet of the other. But we need to remember that this is the Black Sea. It's not the Atlantic Ocean, it's not the Mediterranean, it's not a relatively close sea, not so big one. And Ukraine succeeded in using missiles of their own design, plus UAVs, plus sea drones, good intelligence, I'm sure, command and control systems, maybe some help from allies. And it succeeded in pushing the Russian fleet away from Crimea and away from Ukrainian coast. Nowadays, the Russians are in close to Novorossiysk and considering building another naval base in Georgia, South Abkhazia. And they use their naval platforms just as a platforms to shoot missiles, not really as a navy. And this is an unexpected lesson from this war, the importance of drones, including autonomous drones, intelligence, swarms, and all that. And Ukraine is performing just amazingly in that regard. On the other hand, it is still premature to call the end of naval ships. We still will need them for the foreseeable time. Bulgaria is building two new patrol boats, and one will be on water again next year, the other one in 2026. Like something between a corvette and a frigate, but multifunctional, multi-purpose boats, which will add to the capability when there is a need. So these are the lessons I'm drawing from the naval part of the war. Otherwise, we have the risks with floating sea mines, occasionally UAVs or other drones coming our way, unintentionally mostly. More than a year ago, the Russians, or about a year ago, they declared that they'll be doing exercises in our exclusive economic zone. There is at least one case of boarding a commercial ship by the Russians. Lately, we do not have similar cases, which is good because the risks are lower in this case.
So you're no longer talking to us as a government official, but you were one until very recently, and you must have been part of countless discussions within the Bulgarian government, I presume, and at the Defense Ministry about the upcoming NATO summit in Washington. I don't want to talk on behalf of Yulia and Giselle, but it strikes me that we might be sharing a sense that the level of ambition for this summit, be it in terms of support for Ukraine, in terms of securing Ukraine's long-term future as an independent nation, secure from Russian aggression, and indeed the sort of level of ambition for securing NATO's eastern flank more broadly through forward deployment and all the sort of logistics that comes with it, that none of those things is really sort of adequate to the dangers that the alliance is facing at the present time. Could you tell us something, cheerful? Could you tell us why we're wrong and why we should be actually looking forward to pleasant surprises coming out of the summit next week?
You asked the difficult questions, Todor.
Well, some of these developments take time. In Vilnius, the summit in July of last year, we approved the regional plans. And now there will be this political level, most senior level overview of where we stand in terms of execution. Whether we have the right mix of forces, whether we have the infrastructures, facilities to preposition equipment and ammunitions, integrated air and missile defense, and some others. And that's a lot of work. It may not sound so impressive, but for example, from July of last year till I left, we negotiated the establishment here in Bulgaria of multinational divisional HQ for the land forces. I assume that it will be approved now in Washington, and to you that may not seem much, but for us that will be years of work to develop the infrastructure, to appoint the people, train the people, bring in all representatives of other allies, making this HQ functional. That takes a lot of time and effort, and I'm sure progress will be appreciated during the Washington summit. In terms of the support for Ukraine, indeed, the aim is to provide support not as long as it takes, as is the current formula, but as much as Ukraine needs. Okay? And we'll see to what extent we'll make that transition from the previous formula to a new formula. And that support needs to be, as the outgoing Secretary General Stoltenberg stated several times, it needs to be predictable in time, long-term allocation and commitment by allies and other countries that support Ukraine. I think also another major issue will be the partnerships with countries close and far away. Already in Vilnius, we had most senior level representation from Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea. I expect that this will continue because in this world now of uncertainty and although we tend to focus on Russia, especially on the eastern flank, our focus is practically entirely on Russia. As a foreseeable threat, looking into longer term, we need to make sure as an ally that we can deal with other challenges, including in Southeast Asia and elsewhere, and these partnerships will be important. And many other issues, you know, in a communique you have usually 50 or 60 or more points. Each one addresses a number of issues, but in my opinion, these three will be in the highlights.
So then let us also ask you the political question. And I guess it's very timely in the context of the summit, but it goes beyond the summit, of course, into US elections and beyond into next year. And the question is, how does, in your understanding, or how should, in your understanding, the war end? And I'm asking you as Todor Tagarev individual, but also maybe you can tell your understanding, but also maybe you can tell us about the debate or the arguments that are being advanced on this topic at the national level. And the reason why I'm asking this sort of twofold question, you personally with your analysis, but also the national level, is that I've just returned from, I guess, half a tour around the Black Sea. I missed Bulgaria this year. That's why I'm thrilled to have you here. But I went to Georgia, I went home to Romania, and I went to Turkey. And I've asked, among other things, this question, people, and I was struck at how different the ideal answers or the ideal outcome was described at the national level between countries around the Black Sea, but also within, if you want to call them factions or groupings, schools of thought within Turkey, within Romania, within Georgia. So with all of that premise, how should the war end?
Well, maybe I should have started with that, but anything I say cannot be related to the Bulgarian government. I'm talking as an individual here, an academic who is quite free in expressing opinions and sharing opinions, but cannot be related to the government. My personal view is that there are several ifs, if European and US sanctions and sanctions by other countries are more effective and the support to Russia stops, and if sanctions have the intended negative impact on the economy and their capacity to produce massive quantities of new weapon systems and ammunition, and if we provide the support Ukraine indeed needs to protect itself, and secondly, to liberate the occupied territories, Ukraine will win. When and whether all these conditions will be met soon, we don't know. That depends to an extent on elections, not only in the US, but also in several European countries. trustees. I believe that the chances are pretty good. If it takes too long for that, it will depend on Ukraine whether they can accept another interim resolution. It will not be a resolution, another interim arrangement to stop the war, to stop the hot phase of the war, to no one else. No one else. I mean, here you can ask people on the street as much as you wish, but at the end it depends on the Ukrainians, what they will be ready to accept as an interim arrangement. And it will be interim, both on the side of Ukraine and on the side of Russia. No one will be happy. Both sides will probably try after a certain period to further their agendas. If it comes to use force, they will be ready to use force. Unfortunately, it will be very unstable. Any other solution other than the restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine in its internationally recognized borders will not be seen as sustainable.
If I could just ask one question before we say goodbye, just would like to get your sense of whether you think the alliance and also, the West, the United States, the collective West has really sufficiently turned its attention to the eastern flank. Mark Rutte may turn out to be Ursula von der Leyen in terms of the kind of transformation that he may grow in office the way that she has done and become the Secretary General that the alliance needs. Still, I think the three of us on this program really tried to advocate for a representative of an Eastern European country, just to symbolize the shift in alliance focus. And as others were suggesting earlier, it looks like the summit is going to be not surprising, but all too predictable. How would you sort of assess, and you can just talk about NATO, you can talk about Europe more broadly, or Europe and the United States, but all of us, are we devoting sufficient effort and attention to what is the rising strategic problem in Europe that threatens to unravel, what have been 75 years of relative peace, and after the end of the Cold War, a remarkable, freeing of captive peoples, to use the old style formulation. I think the three of us are quite nervous that we're not doing so, just to reveal our prejudices. But please better inform us or give us your take.
Well, both NATO and the European Union, they have this 360 degrees policy. Of course, for the eastern flank, Russia is the biggest threat. For countries in the south, it's probably migration. For others, it's something else. It is always useful to speak louder in a single voice about the needs of the eastern flank in this case. And it's good we have Kaja Kallas as a high representative and the lead for the European External Action Service. That's a progress. We have Mircea Joana as Deputy Secretary General, maybe for a few more months. And we'll see who will succeed that. That's also an important position. I have met a couple of times with Mr. Rutte. He is very skillful, very experienced politician. And coming from the Netherlands, I expect absolutely solid and clear position in terms of Russia's aggression and the need to deter and, if necessary, not only defend but defeat Russia. I think he will. I have no doubt that he will be representing that view. So whether we can do something more, I think the eastern flank nowadays is getting a lot of attention. And with the multinational battle groups, integrated air missile defense, deployment of US forces, with the addition of Sweden and Finland especially, it became stronger. What we need to understand, on the other hand, that as an alliance, we need to take a longer term view. This is the current challenge. Maybe it will resolve in a year or two or three, hopefully. But there are other challenges coming from other areas, be that new technologies, pandemics, artificial intelligence, competition in other areas of the world. There are other countries, autocratic countries, are moving very aggressively and having a very, very strong influence on that. We need to pay attention on those longer term challenges and risks as well. It will be always a balance agreed between allies, 32 allies already. So at 75, NATO is as strong as ever.
As a dangerously cheery note, I think we should stop now.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. We are always struggling by default on the Eastern Front to end on a positive note, but you've managed to give us, if not a positive, a very balanced view of things. So before we screw it over, let's just leave it at that. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you as well. Thanks a lot.
That was Todor Tagarev from Bulgaria, and this is Yulia Joja and my friends Giselle Donnelly and Dalibor Rohach. Thank you for listening to the Eastern Front. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. To stay up to date with the Eastern Front, give us a follow on Twitter or X at Eastern Front Pod in one word, and sign up for the newsletter included in the show notes. You can find more episodes and additional content on our website, aei.org, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And before you go, quick shout out to the NATO at 75 report that we have just published. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. We have a very ambitious agenda for NATO after the summit. Thank you, and until next time, goodbye.